Hello, my name is Don Finnegan, and we're here in Old Town Tallinn with Kurt Doodle. It's been an honor to have you. We've had you for the last 2 weeks. I think you've enjoyed yourself in one of the freer countries in the world, right?
I love it. Don, thank you for being a great host. And yeah, I've had a blast here. The restaurants are amazing. Of course, that's the first thing I'll think of. The Old Town history is beautiful. Thank you for setting me up with a tour guide who showed me around, and she was knowledgeable in the arts, which is even better. And we've had a pretty good time here so far. And I love your apartment, by the way. It's gorgeous. We're in the top floor of this 600-year-old building or something like that?
700 years old.
600-year-old building. It's absolutely beautiful.
Hansa building, though, also, which is important to recognize.
Yes,
right?
yes.
We're in a Hanseatic city right now.
That's right. So for people who don't know what a Hanseatic city is, it's like something they can go look up.
And should, by the way, because it's quite an interesting history, right?
Yes, it is. What's our topic today? What are we going to talk about?
So we're going to talk about circumpolar civilizations and peoples, the Russians, the Anglos, and the Brits. The Russians, the Anglos, and the Germans.
Yes.
Today, and whether or not there is such an idea, whether it's viable. Now, I also understand on this subject that it's a little bit sensitive at the moment, given the Russian seizure of Crimea, and as you have many followers on Facebook and on your blog as well, I know that you can be divisive when it comes to the subject of the Russian. And also, particularly here, it can be divisive, because Estonia has a very difficult history, as I'm sure you're aware with
All of Eastern
Russians.
Europe has a difficult Russian history. You brought that up, and so people who know me pretty well or have been following me long enough know that I attack ideas as on purpose, right? I mean, and I attack them vociferously, but it's a little bit of a scientific experiment when I'm attacking something very hard. In the case of attacking the Russian, I've been traditionally pro-Russian, which most people know, especially pro-Russian culture.
Is that true? Because it often seems that you're not. I mean, I have to jump in right now. It often seems that you are attacking. I mean, it seems you're very aggressive against the Russians.
I am very aggressive.
And sometimes as well, that turns me off a bit. Well,
yes.
As much. And I know Russians who are more Western, having lived in Estonia. I don't have much experience with the Russians in Russia, but sometimes it seems a bit
over the top.
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think you've lost some followers because of that.
I probably have. First of all, it's personal for me, right? I live in Ukraine. I'm watching what the Russian invasion of Ukraine has done. The revolution happened in my neighborhood right outside my door.
Yeah.
And so I watched a whole bunch of young people who desperately want to get out from underneath post-Soviet poverty and poverty and corruption. They want to live like their Polish cousins and brothers and friends and relatives. So they see it. Well, there's no reason we can't live like the Poles. There's no reason at all. The only thing that's preventing us is the corruption, and the only thing that's creating corruption is this alliance between the Russified East, where the Russian military manufacturing is going on, the bureaucracy that's still held over from Russification, the oligarchs who function as most people don't understand the boyar system, but it's an exploitive system very close to Eastern Europe, and the Russians are in a boyar system, which means their nobility is very close to serfdom, whereas our nobility is really just military.
Can I jump in there? I
Sure.
understood the Bolsheviks exterminated or any nobleman or noble family who couldn't escape. Is there still an idea of Russian nobility?
Well, there's certainly an aristocratic character of Russians in Moscow and St. Petersburg. I mean, you run into them all the time. The difference between Russian aristocracy and Western aristocracy, and Anglo-German and Italian aristocracy or French aristocracy, is the tortured Russian soul, that is not, that Dostoevsky talks about all the time. But I mean, and any critic of Russian history or historian of Russian culture knows that the idea of the anguished Russian soul is as substantial a part of their character is heroism as part of the American or Anglo. So you can't really get away from that, but that doesn't mean there's no aristocratic culture. It does mean, however, that there's no aristocratic control of the government. And that's really what's left behind. Whereas, if you go to Europe today, I mean, an awful lot of the people who are in government are really
the old
aristocracy. So it's just been a change in the structure of government. In America, we never had the aristocracy, so we're a totally commercialized society. We tend to view our commercial people as our aristocrats. I wanted to get off to why I've been so aggressive against Russia, and that's because I'm living there and I'm watching what's happening on one hand, but I have a bunch of other reasons. And I actually got to ask your forgiveness and the audience forgiveness. Is a lot of arguments I've made 1,000 times, right? And so this one is fairly new, right? We just started talking about this the other day, and so I have to glance at my notes to make sure I capture them all. First reason I'm upset is that it was completely unnecessary. So everybody's talked about the division in Ukraine for, certainly forever. And so the problem was that it would have been very easy for Russia to acquire the peninsula and the eastern districts, either as an autonomous section or as to have them secede to Russian territory, simply by trading Ukrainians oil. And it was something we were talking about. I mean, I'm one of the few Western intellectuals in Ukraine, but there's plenty of guys who were talking about this. It was one of the ideas that was pushed around. So it was unnecessary. It was profoundly harmful to Ukraine. The second reason is it broke the post-war consensus, which is, most people realize this, but the whole American or Western Anglo approach to the post-war era has been that the purpose of states is to take care of their citizens under a principle of human rights, and that states have no interests beyond their boundaries. In other words, that the states our boundaries are fixed, and the reason we want to do that is to focus states internally, is in order to prevent another world war. So this is the general thing that's been going on for a while. What Putin did with this was he violated the post-war consensus. The worst part of it is he just told every country in the world that the only sovereignty you have is nuclear weapons. So what this has done is driven up the demand for nuclear weapons by every country on Earth. Did you want to ask me something there?
No, I wonder on that subject about Putin. So in the West, we certainly see him as the aggressor. But I can also, and I definitely have friends here, Russian friends, but also friends who've left other Western European countries, and you've seen the maps. We have bases surrounding the country. Is there not an argument that America or the West or NATO might be aggressing against Russia as well, and that we might have provoked the attack on Crimea?
Well, I mean, let me flip it around. If you're Russia and you go to the Security Council, or you call up the President of the United States and say, "Look, guys, there's been a revolution over there. I can't afford to lose this, so I really don't want to go take it. You think you can broker a deal with the Ukrainians so that we don't have a conflict here?" He ends up Putin was becoming the most powerful and influential political leader in the world. And he was forcing the uniting of Germany and Russia, which is something that the West certainly needs. We need to unite German technology and engineering with Russian labor and resources. We certainly need to be. The West needs this. Russia could be the army of Europe. Why does America need to be? So, I mean, I think from the Americans' perspective, that's what we've been looking at. I mean, that's our belief that this would just happen. So America's withdrawn pretty much everybody. There might be bases there, but those bases are interested in controlling the expansion of radical Islam. And we had our population of soldiers in Europe down to something like 60,000, which, I mean, Europe's a big place. That's nothing. So, I mean, I'm probably wrong in that number by a little bit, but it's not orders of magnitude. So we'd already effectively pulled out and focused what we call the pivot to Asia. So from Americans' perspective, Russia was joining the civilized world. It just needed more time, to push out corruption. People don't realize this, but Putin something like quintupled a number of cases that have been happening in courts because he's actually implemented at least some rule of law in that country. So he's done a pretty good job. He pacified the oligarchs, which they call the Jewish mafia. He then pacified the mafia, and then he's tried to start the courts. And the only thing he wasn't able to do, and if you look at it from his perspective, it makes sense. He wasn't able to diversify the economy because he needed all the money from the oil to make all this change happen in a country where the only way to get anything to happen is to pay people for it. Mm-hmm. So, I actually understand his perspective. It's not like I don't understand. His problem was he's trying to rebuild the Soviet Empire instead of be the leader of the circumpolar people.
Which he could have been, right?
He could have been.
I remember I met you in 2012 at
I
a
said
conference.
he can do it, honestly. He can pull this off. He can eliminate, he's the only rational voice against democracy and against what we call secular humanism, which is universalism. Yep. He's the only voice of that. He was right. He was building a following in the West. So I'm not really against Russia or Russia. I'm angry that he blew this chance that we spent 70 years or maybe 100 years of distraction fighting each other instead of unifying. And and so this is what troubles me about it. And so I want to be aggressive about it so that I can it's not okay that he's taken over the media to issue lies. If he takes over the media to stop lying, who cares?
Lying's a very important subject, though, right?
Yes.
And we've had many discussions on this subject, too.
Lying is not a trivial... my expertise is truth, right? So, truth-telling. And so, lying is a very... propagandizing and lying, when there's manufacturing news, by taking Chechen war videos, saying that they're taking in place in Ukraine, making news stories about and publishing them, this is just nonsense. We also know that the disinformation ministry there is what they're trying to do. Realize that less than half of the Russians have access to the internet. But you realize around the world, that's what's causing revolutions, is access to the internet. So what he's trying to do is poison the information system. Right?
It's part of their state.
That's part of their state plan. We know this, right? So we have plenty of evidence and documents. We have testimony from people who've worked inside it. There's a whole, in St. Petersburg, there's a whole industry, what do you call it? A bureau. I can't remember the Russian name for a bureau. There's a whole, and they pay people, basically $800 a month to basically spam the internet. My website, because I've come out against this kind of thing, my website, I probably get 200 blocked IPs a day, and probably twice that in people trying to hack my site out of Russia. So that's because it's an intentional program. Now the Chinese are different. They just want to stop conversation. They don't want you to say anything, any dissent.
But they're not very good at conversation to begin with.
That's probably true. And they have an ancient problem with trust. The problem I have with Russia is that this isn't necessary. There's no reason he couldn't just tell the truth.
The Russian problem with trust is not ancient. Chinese, we know, is very old.
Russian. I'm going to cover all the countries in a minute because you've asked me to do that. If you have a Russian friend, you can trust that friend. I actually have Russian friends.
Until the death.
Yeah, and you want them. You certainly want a Russian friend more than an American friend. By any question, you probably want to do a business deal with an American more than you want to do a deal with a Russian. But you would love to have your Russian friends. It's a beautiful thing. Lost my train of thought. I said I don't want to go into the difference, but from the different countries. But if we get into Russian history, they don't have a philosopher that says lie. China does. China has its first philosopher, Sun Tzu, and his philosophy, he's just as influential as Sun Tzu. This is their Aristotle, is to say delay and deceive. Right? You delay and deceive until you've amassed enough power that the other side can't afford to fight you. This is Chinese strategy in a nutshell, right? Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, but so then they feel no shame, no guilt, no.
No, but this is the problem in Russia and Islam too. Russia was ruled by Islamic rulers, and it was ruled by Mongol rulers. And what is a ruler's tactic to rule you? And that is to sow distrust among the population, so that there's increased demand for authority.
Yep.
Right. Converse to the common law, which is our heritage, we create trust to eliminate demand for authority, because we don't want competitors to our noble families. So Russia has the problem that they've been ruled by Mongols. I mean, arguably, Russian civilization is Mongolian. You have, not too long ago, Russian princes wearing Islamic symbolism and Islamic imagery. And only really do you really get a European shift with the effort to build St. Petersburg in the European model. So I mean, there are much better historians of Russia than I am. I only have the need to solve one problem, which is the issue of trust. And so I specialize in those parts of those things that affect the evolution of trust. So your question was, they don't have a legacy of deception, right?
Yep.
They don't have a philosopher that says deceptions. What they have is constant administration by people who sow distrust in order to prevent the population from rallying, right? And they had that under the Mongols, they had that under the Khazars, they have it under the, what if you want? Somebody's going to argue with me that didn't happen. All right, well, let's just talk about, they've had it under their influences. They had it under the Soviets. And so, I mean, there's the building on this street, the Soviet, the KGB prison is where they took various people to interrogate and make them disappear, is right out down the street here.
75 meters down the street.
Well, the way you stop people is you sow distrust. This is actually what's happened with the use of propaganda in America. The Soviets knew this. They paid the Frankfurt School to do this, or they influenced Frankfurt School. This took root in the West, and Western intellectuals have been fomenting distrust against the upper classes for the better part of a century now. And so propaganda works, fomenting dissent works, because it increases demand for the state. So Russia has a history of demand for authority, whereas the rest of Europe doesn't. We don't have a history. Matter of fact, the farther west you go, the less demand for authority we have, and the opposite that happens. We have a demand for liberty instead.
May I jump in there? So you're reminding me very much of Francis Fukuyama's book, Trust, obviously. And I think many of these arguments...
He makes similar arguments. He wouldn't make it exactly the same.
No, of course not. But what he might say, though, is, and I remember this from the book as well, he talks about France having once been a high trust society. Of course, it's not anymore. It's a relatively low trust. Mm-hmm. So the point there he makes, and I think you can draw this parallel to the States as well, we're not immune either as Americans. No. The state practices this propaganda. It practices the very old technique of population replacement, multiculturalism, and mass immigration. And of course, what happens to one of the most high trust societies in the world is that we too become low trust and authoritarian at the same time.
We go back to in Nixon's election, the whole country voted for, he won every state,
yep. Mm-hmm.
right? And then now we're so atomized. The left has been so successful in dividing us, and the right so successful in resisting it, that you've had a polarization of the electorate between married white people, single mothers and immigrants and people in minorities on the other. So that's really what the American electorate looks like, and it's sown distrust. And so you can't implement policy in a country where everybody's arguing. So this is why authority rises, and
yep, of course.
Is it when diversity increases, you increase the demand for authority.
Because cultures within themselves are often very good at orbiting disputes and orbiting.
That's why small is good.
Small is great.
Small is good, and if you're big, you have to homogenous. That's what China does.
On a personal level, you and I can vouch for that too, right?
Well, sorry. No. We're over my head. Anyway, all right. God damn it. So anyway, see if there's a way to migrate the conversation in the direction. So we've been taught. So just as you said that we said it started with that China has a history of deceit, and they practice low trust. I mean, the argument is that in China they. Sun Tzu comes out, Deception Delay. They used ritual to contain the nobility instead of argument, and so they increased the scope of ritual over and over again until the nobility was contained by rituals. This is, if you want to read about this, the one who wrote the can't remember her name. I want to. If you want to read that, she goes over into the history of all the different cultures, how they originated. But the ritual and this historical view is a way that the classes started controlling nobility.
And ritual, I've never heard you say that. I mean, we've had many conversations, heard many things. That's brilliant. That explains their stagnation.
That's exactly what it is.
The Chinese civilization
backward-looking.
stopped, right?
They're backward
and they
looking.
see, and you probably know this as well, a Westerner looks forward to the future.
Yes.
A Chinaman has his back to it.
Yes.
I shouldn't have said that word.
An Asian.
Asian.
Well, I mean,
celestial.
I don't think telling a Chinese person that's a Western prohibition, but a person from China.
If I can say Englishman, why can't I say Chinaman?
Well, because you never know what associations people draw. But in other words, we're trying to speak the truth, and so that's what we'll get with. So people from China, the Chinese culture, I mean, Sinic civilization, so how we refer to it, they look to the past for wisdom. Americans or Westerners are technologists. We are metal workers. We built chariots and horses. We adopted new technology as fast as we could get it, and we use truth with one another. And because we use truth with one another, there's very little friction. We never had needed irrigation, so we never developed a centralized state. So there's no resistance from there. Our law was common, which means it evolved with the first suit that you and I had. The law evolved with it. So we never had this stuff where you have to look back, have to appeal to authority. Neither in law and economics nor in tradition, in psychological tradition, we didn't have these things where you look at the past. So there's no resistance to innovation like there is in other cultures. Well, you brought up them. Let's bring up religious cultures. The center of the world, the Islamic world now, is and the Hindu world. The Hindu world's kind of fascinating because it has South American style castes. Or American, South America has Hindu-style castes, and in order to segregate the classes, and they looked away from the world. They looked to the nether regions, right? They used an ideal world. Islam looks to rigorous law. In other words, everybody does exactly this. The West looks to cooperation. How can we avoid conflict? And each of our cultures developed slightly differently. Russia didn't get the luxury that we have had of the Enlightenment. They didn't get the chance, with any of its forms, the artistic, whatever. They didn't get chivalry, and chivalry is something I talk about often because I mean, guys like you and me. I mean, we treat guys like you and me. We treat women a certain way on purpose. Because we can get status signals out of that. But if you haven't had chivalry, the only way to get status is by fighting masculinity. So you never get this, you never get the Enlightenment reason, you never get aristocratic manorialism, you never get militialism, where you and I can be in the same village. But I mean, if there's a war, I know you're the sergeant. And I just follow you. Yep. That's my job. And so I can't really cause friction with you because honestly, when I'm under your command next summer, you're going to make sure I get killed.
No, and it's interesting on the subject of chivalry. So it's not just Russian as well. We're in the Eastern, I wouldn't say Eastern, we're in the Finnic world now. And it penetrated less chivalry as well here, I believe.
They're Lutherans here. They did pretty well. Yeah, it's pretty
I still find, there's still anecdotes I have or experiences.
They don't have aristocracy to imitate.
Yeah,
right?
no,
They don't have a highly wealthy. They don't have a French aristocracy to imitate.
No.
And we did. I mean, we had both in France and in Italy, in the German princedoms, we had all that wealth. I mean, that built up by the Lotharingians and the Hanseatic leagues and the North Sea trading circles. I mean, we had all those people to imitate, so we could build it.
It's an anecdote, and I don't think it's so much a sign of the times as a sign of the part of the world that we're in. But the other day I was out to dinner. A beautiful girl, and I pulled out her chair for her. She walked right by it. And I asked her about this later afterwards, and she says to me, "Oh, well, no one's ever done that for me, so I have no idea."
What
I
it
have no
means.
idea. Anyway, but I find chivalry, you'll find, is I think a northwestern and southwestern. But once you cross into Poland, dissipates. Correct? And seriously.
I think it's different. We'll cover that in the next second.
Okay.
So we just said that they have a chivalry, but they don't have chivalry, but it's different. It's harder for a man to obtain masculine signals by acts of service. He has to obtain those signals by acts of strength, right? And so the options for him are smaller. The way they do is that, and you'll hear that in this part of the world. The women say, "I want a man who's strong, who protects me, who brings an income home." So they don't have the Franglicized version of chivalry, which is that we do dramatic, romantic gestures of all the time in order to show that we're men of good character. You will find Russian men always go to help an older woman. I mean, if you see if there's trouble on the street, they're just like Americans. They run to fix it, and they take responsibility for it. You will see an accident happen where 30 men come lift the car off, and they feel they own it, right? The same way Westerners feel they own it. What you don't see is that attitude toward the commons. So what you see in the West is, I always give the example of, well, if you go to a castle in rural England, there's some woolen-clad woman who's the size of a barrel who knows everybody who's ever lived there, their cousins, their relatives, and everything out, every bit of history, and she has a little black bottle of enamel paint, and if there's a scratch somewhere on the railing, she patches it. If you go to Chartres Cathedral, you don't find that. You find a bunch of young kids who are treating it as a summer job, and they don't know anything about it. If you go to Pompeii and you take a tour with a tour guide there, good luck somebody actually tells you one thing that's true. It'll all be nonsense. If it's like I had to plug my ears on the tour every time I've gone because it makes me so angry. Russians have a similar problem, is that their history isn't very nice, and so they've been looking for one. Right now, what Russia does is its mythos is built around the Nazis. It's a reaction to the Nazis. So that's why you hear Putin right now invoking Nazi terminology, which is kind of funny because I know these guys. I live in Kiev, and there's a very big difference between nationalism and putting people in ovens. But this is the Russian mythos.
Don't you see that effort, though, in the States as well, building around World War II, and they tried with Lincoln, they tried, and I think that they failed. I mean, for all the time, they always try to substitute Jefferson, Washington, and Adams with Lincoln. Doesn't work. Lincoln was a butcher and not a hero. They tried it with World War II. It is not the same thing or the same school or the element at work that's trying to create a heavily authoritarian, strong central government and replace our old traditions.
Well, this is, we always laugh about women rallying and shaming, right?
Yep.
What's going on there? The exact same thing. It's just rallying. So you rally toward your leaders. One of the ways you know an argument's nonsense is if they tell you to rally a leader. One of the things you can see in libertarian...
Yeah, brilliant.
What?
Brilliant. No, it's
So
exactly right. Not an argument, but a leader.
Right. So you say, people will argue with you about the theory of evolution. They don't argue with you about Darwin being an idol. When you hear people talk about Mises, they talk about Mises being great, not about his arguments. The reason is because if you know enough about science to know what his arguments are, they're nonsense. So anytime somebody's doing what we call heaping undue praise, all right, they're trying to rally. They're not trying to convince. And so we know that's what they're doing. So I don't really shame people or criticize people for rallying. What I care about is whether they're rallying for a moral cause or an immoral cause.
But once you begin rallying, you're talking about the lower, the people who desperately need a leader. And one of the things that terrified me so much recently was, I often say that they've replaced the aristocracy with celebrity.
It's true.
Absolutely. Men need, and Jung will say this, he says, you can see one of his videos on YouTube, he'll talk about how he's an atheist, he doesn't believe in God, but he finds that the key insight of his whole career is that man is primarily a religious being.
Yes.
That tells me is man needs, or most men, common man, needs someone to worship. And that's a dangerous, dangerous thing, and that's why they...
Worship is a loaded statement. I'm going to rephrase what you just said as scientifically. People need a means of decidability, and they need a means of organizing. So I have to be in the world. If to the average individual, the world is chaos. He has to find a way of turning this chaos of information into something that's actionable, that he can obtain sustenance, fulfillment, and the reproduction from. And so the problem we need is we need something to rally around so that we know what to choose. And one of the ways we know what to choose is by what fish all the fish around us are schooling toward. So this is the same thing in an economy. I'm going to use this illustration this example to illustrate your point. In an economy, we see an opportunity and we flock in school toward it until it's exhausted, and then people start breaking off. Right? If they don't, they just vaporize at once like a flock of birds going off into Never Never Land and reorganize into something else. Well, the same thing has to do with people needing leaders. It's a problem for us as very educated people is, we don't depend on others for our ideas. We get our ideas from the great leaders of the world or something, but we don't have to go and say, what should I do in this obvious, to you and I, what's an obvious case? They don't have a means of decidability. We're not equal in our ability to decide. So the bigger the population, the more diverse it is, the more it needs a leader in order to anthropomorphically represent a decision. To coalesce people around an organization, because not all production can be done by individual groups that share dissimilar interests, like the economy. In order to produce commons, we need to rally. Does this make sense?
No, it does, and it's. I'll tell you why I need a leader. I'll suggest why I think you need a leader, and that is so that the 90% of the common people stay out of our business.
Well, exactly.
Just leave them be, let them worship, let them have the pageant. I call it the pageant.
The pageant. They need their theater. That's why I say we don't need monopoly government, right? We have three basic. I guess I could jump ahead and say that we have, I always argue that we have a division of intertemporal division of reproductive labor. Women focus on consumption. I'm saying this women. There's a distribution of men and women. We overlap a lot, right?
Yep.
So when I make a big category like that, I'm not saying...
Are you saying women like to shop?
Well, women do what they do. They collect resources and feed them into children so that we have generations that work. Libertarians, those women tend to be leftists. Libertarians tend to be specialists in production. We care about the medium term. How do I transform this into that so people have things? I am rewarded by that. And because of that, I want a lot of liberty to adapt to those circumstances. A conservative is thinking about the opposite. He's thinking about the tribe. He wants to make sure, because we're alphas, you and I are alphas, and an alpha looks out at the world and says, I want my tribe to prosper. Fuck the other ones. Right, and so this is what a conservative does: is he tries to accumulate capital. And so the problem is we keep using this Enlightenment era, and will tie us back to Russia eventually through our circuitous discussion here. Will tie us back to Russia as the Enlightenment program went just like religion did to a single ideal, just like Jesus was the ideal, just like Muhammad was the ideal.
What's the idea on the Enlightenment?
Buddha is the idea. Try to be one instead of be a division of labor. Well, same thing under democracy. We're all equal instead of we're in classes. Well, in other words, very able, less able to do something, and much less able and needing a lot of direction. And we're in a division of labor where the conservatives, which represent the Austrian school, say don't touch anything, accumulate all wealth. We have the libertarians, which represent the Chicago or Freshwater School, and they say interfere only as much as is necessary to not cause disruption. And you have the Saltwater School, the Jewish school, which says we want discretion to arbitrarily change an experiment to keep the optimum going. And so this is just divisions of labor. The problem is when you have one, you have majority rule, then you have to find a way of deciding between those different axes. But if you have trade in a market for commons, if your government, instead of being a majority rule by law, a monopoly, forces trade between those three groups, short, medium, and long term, upper class, middle class, and lower class, then what you'll get is you'll get a market for the production of commons, the same way you get a market for the production of goods and services, consumption. This makes sense? I can't tell you if you're following me or not. So the Enlightenment error, is caused by this, and this is that the British come around with the Enlightenment and they say, we're going to make our reproductive strategy as island people say that's universal. And you had the Germans come around with their Marshall landed strategy, saying we're going to make our our evolutionary strategy universal. And you have the Ashkenazis coming with the cosmopolitan Enlightenment, and which is where a lot of this is where the socialism, neoconservatism, and libertinism come from. Is that you have them come out and use their group evolutionary strategy, which is create reality by chanting, right? Whereas Anglo is to create law, and Germans to create morality. Well, why wouldn't it work that you have Anglo people creating the American Constitution, Germans as their philosophical work? You would have Germans using Kant, which is just restating authoritarian Christianity in sort of certain terms to tell you, well, you can't really know anything, so you have to go with the order. And then you have Ashkenazi separatist ethics, which mean I don't want to pay anything into the commons, and don't touch me, but
protect me.
But protect me. And so these are just I don't. And the problem is you get over to Russia and they get over and they're like trying to have their Enlightenment. What happens?
When did they try to have their Enlightenment, the Russians?
Well, you start to see this is I'm going to get killed for no matter how I do this, because there's one of those things where there's I can make these vast generalizations about philosophy, but if I go over the Russians really do it with, they have great philosophers, by the way. They actually do it with literature the same way.
Yeah, okay,
right?
okay.
And so they're closer to the German. Anglo is very scientific. German is very rational. Russian is very literary, and it forces you to empathize with this suffering, this nihilism. And the Jewish is like hermeneutic, where they study the scripture for centuries, right? This is what they do. They study and they justify whatever they have to do in order to maintain group cohesion. And so they basically come up with the pseudosciences of Freud and Marx and Cantor and Rothbard and Mises. They produce the pseudosciences. So we have a whole, which is what they're just like Anglo's a revision, Germans are revision, Russians are revising their things that Ashkenaz revised theirs. So every culture in there tried to create oneness because they were a solid group before, and they wanted to expand during the Enlightenment. And take what they knew as right, because that's what you do, right? You have a means of organizing that works for you. You don't really understand anything else. You just do it. It's not like the guys in the Frankfurt School really knew what they were doing. They just did what it was intuitive to them. Not like the guys in the American and British Enlightenments did what made sense to them.
Were we mistaken in America?
Everybody was mistaken. I think you can. That's actually the magic question. Is we're in state. Everybody was mistaken. The Brits, the British, the Anglosphere, the English people, we were mistaken in thinking, in saying, well, an island culture, island civilization, which is surrounded by this wonderful fortress called the ocean and the sea. And where everybody's the third cousin of somebody else, and where we've genetically pacified our population for at least, for aggressively for 1,000 years, but probably 3,000 to 4,000 years that we've killed off every malcontent we can, where you can take that and apply this aristocracy, this vision of an aristocracy of everyone to the whole world. It was a catastrophic failure. It was. I mean, the only people that benefit is they got our rule of law, but if everything else we did, it was a failure. French is worse. They tried to bring their fantasy to the rest of the world, and every French colony is a disaster.
Yep.
The Germans never really got a chance. The Russians certainly did, and they did it the Roman way, which is, just force everybody to speak the same language, and they conquered a lot of territory with it. The problem is that we all carry this with us. We carry the American Utopianism, Anglo-British optimism, German realism, realistic view of man. The Germans are right about the vision of man. The Anglos are wrong. The Germans don't view the world as an aristocracy and everybody. They view us as a hierarchical structure of society, each of who has roles to play in order for us to mutually succeed. I'm not sure I can really understand the Russian vision of society. It seems to be fairly equalitarian or egalitarian, but it's really a mafia culture. And it's been with them since through the nobility period, through the Soviets, just extended mafia culture, and even once the Soviet Union fell apart, the oligarchs came in and replaced mafia culture. And you could argue that Putin's use of Chechens and the Secret Service, the Secret Service in Russia is who controls the drug trade, and the gangsterization or the near privatization of the oil industry is essentially a mafia structure.
But I want to ask you, what was it before the Bolsheviks executed the aristocracy and the Romanov? The aristocracy before the Bolsheviks and before Stalin, they also behaved the same way as the oligarchs now. Is that correct, or it was not better or idyllic? Was it worse? Was it?
Well, it's actually really fun to listen, but really you have it very different depending on where you are. But what you get is serfdom gets abandoned in the 1800s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're really it's really like plantations. It's more analogous to American plantation owners, except they're not so benevolent. And this is partly to do with the scale of the place and the harshness of it, but they're not so benevolent. So they really haven't had time to switch from serfdom, to individualism. So they haven't had any of the institutional changes.
Oh, but that's an interesting question. So the Chinese or the Asians, I forget who it was, but it was Tennyson or. And I'll remember afterwards, but it says individuality or personality, destruction is the end of the Asian culture, Asian civilization, whereas its development is the end of the West.
Yes.
Is the Russian an individual? Does he have a personality, or is he? Where does he stand in between?
The problem is nobody trusts anybody. They're like us. If we could give them common law for 200 years, if you sent 100,000 Western lawyers,
I'd be happy to. They can have every single one of our
lawyers.
lawyers.
We got one per 300 or something now. You sent them over there so that the Russian people could trust their courts, just so that they could trust them.
Yep.
In maybe 2 generations, it'd be fixed. Look at Poland.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting example. So genetically, the ethnicity is
us.
But they're very close to the Russians, almost indistinguishable.
Yes.
The Poles. But the culture changed them, or the culture made them far more Western and far more.
It sucks. Think of the Russian mind, right? They're paranoid. They're surrounded on all sides, right? They've been enslaved by everybody. The Mongols came in and they, from their perspective, destroyed their civilization. They've been attacked over and over again, and from their perspective, the Germans were going to come do it again. So they're not irrational to be paranoid. The problem is that we can't understand each other. So this goes. Let's run down this. You already started me out on the division of labor between the cultures. So I want to make 2 points because this is our real issue. There were 2 points I wanted to make. One was the division of labor as an extension of the correction of the Enlightenment everywhere, and why we can't trust each other. So can you remind me about one of those if I forget which one?
Of course. So division of labor
and
between Anglos, Germans, and Russians, or hopefully even more specialized.
And why we can't understand each other.
Okay.
So I'm going to make the division of labor thing first because it's an extension of what we were just talking about. What we're talking about is that everybody in the Enlightenment tried to universalize their local, their personal, or their group evolutionary strategy, right? And that's what every Enlightenment did. Once the nobility was invalidated by the rise of the middle class everywhere, and the economic production was no longer purely agrarian, and once the church had been weakened as a source of good, and once trade had begun to move from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic and North Atlantic, just as the trade had moved from the from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic and the North Sea, we had this tremendous change in economic structure, which justified a change in political structure, which justified a change in conceptual structure. And so every culture tried, its middle class seized upon an Enlightenment philosophy to justify its ascension, right? And when it did that, we all tried to universalize this. Well, our strategy's best. So you have the Germans and the British and eventually the Americans and the French and the Russians try to make their own enlightenments. We've talked about all these already. So what's happened, though, is that just as we didn't understand that we had the conservative, libertarian, and progressive, or the male, neutral, and gender, female reproductive strategies were an intertemporal division of labor. What we didn't really see was that the Russian, German, Anglo, and American were also a division of labor, right? So that there's a reason why Americans use technological law and the stock market, in other words, internally consistent, logically constructed, almost strictly constructed law from written words, and they use and they have the stock market, which is high risk. There's a reason why Brits use traditional law that's at least dependent, functionally dependent, and they have the bond market. There's a reason why Germany uses Napoleonic law, which is very structured and organized and leaves the state in a lot of power, and they do engineering. And there's a reason why Russia they seem to use Anglo law, but they don't. They use what's called they use law where they do have a jury and a judge and law, but that there's so much bribery involved that the people don't trust it. But there's a reason why Russians have the world's best military. So the most hierarchical structure of them all, authoritarian structure of them all. So, but if you look at these as competing systems, just as you look at a polity as conservative, libertarian, and progressive, if you look at the competing systems, they don't make any sense because you think one's got to win. But if you look at them as cooperative systems that divide up labor between long, medium, and short, and the Russian martial, German engineering, Anglo finance, and American invention, then you see it's not a conflict, it's a division of labor.
And who's long, medium, and short? And are you referring to time horizons or
time
perspective,
horizons,
correct?
Yeah.
Who's long, medium, and short in that mix?
Well, I mean, Americans think by the quarter. That's why we criticize ourselves, right? Arguably, Brits are not much better. I think probably in the medium term. The way the Germans think is they think about trying to make sure society as a group moves forward. And so that's why they have this wonderful education system that they have, is that they see it as their label, the upper classes or the upper middle classes' job is to make an effective competitive labor force. Whereas Russia is just trying to get people not to kill each other. So they're doing a pretty good job, honestly. I mean, if Putin hadn't done this little bit of foolishness, I think that most people would say he'd done remarkably well.
He was a hero for many before
He
Crimea.
was certainly a hero for me. I had a whole bunch of Ukrainians say, "I told you so," but I was
and Estonians, by the way.
Yeah,
I mean, that lesson wasn't lost here as well. But it woke us up in the States, didn't it?
Well, it woke us up in the States because we believed our own utopianism. And this is the problem, is that let's go to this division of labor. America has a stock market because we're utopian, and we're wrong. Brits have the bond market, and they're morally idealistic. As a matter of fact, that's the thing that bothers me about them, is the whole culture is running around everybody trying to get a moral signal each other that they're morally superior to someone else, and they're running out of third worlders to do it to, so they're bringing them in. You know, the Germans don't work like that at all. They're just trying to get work done, and it's very pragmatic. And the Russians are nihilistic. They don't trust each other. So we each have the economies that reflect our trust structures. Right? I mean, that's what we have. We have different trust structures. So, American Puritans pushed this trust very hard. Certainly, Anglos have been successfully invented it. Germans have duty instead of trust, which functions the same way. And the Russians have, it's kind of a code of honor, I guess, would be the best way to look at, or pride. They're very proud people, and I guess they deserve to be.
But you summarize it quite well when you talk about what the Englishman says, what the German says on, and I don't want.
No, go ahead and say it. It's better if you say it than I do.
The German says, was it what must I do, or what should I do?
What should I do?
The Englishman says, what is true?
Yes.
And then the Ashkenazi will say, what can I get away with, or what can I do?
What's useful?
What's useful? Or what's efficient at the time? Or
this is the problem: is that as each Enlightenment took its strategy forward, any argument needs a concept of truth it can rely upon. So you have hermeneutic truth, which is just if you can justify it, you can get away with it. You have scientific truth, which is, well, it's just true. You have idealistic American truth, which isn't true at all, and it's been a failure for us, really. But by consequence, and you have Russian, everybody lies. This is the problem, and they know it, and they want to fix it.
Do they want to fix it?
Yeah, they do. If you talk to the average Russian,
does the Russian know that he lies?
Sure. I mean, I said that this conversation the other day. I think I told you about this. I'm talking to this lovely young woman. She says, I said, ask her the test question. If two people are in a conversation and one of them lies, who's wrong? The person who lied or the person who believed the lie? She said, the person who believed the lie. Well, you told that to an American, and that's up there near murder.
Yeah,
right?
I was there for that.
Yeah,
and you asked, and I said, well, we don't lie.
Yes, we don't lie.
Yeah, you don't do it.
It just doesn't happen.
Yep.
So we can get away with a lot of stuff in our culture. We can get away with being utopian because nobody lies. Now this isn't really true. I'm going to flip it around and give the Finns some credit. Finns and Germans. So Americans don't lie except when it comes to marketing.
Yeah, you mentioned this. Okay.
We have the Yankee trader problem. We have the evangelical preacher problem. And as long as you're selling, it seems to have, those two things seem to have evolved. Once we got mass market advertising, it got a lot worse. We brought a lot of immigrants in, wanted to sell them stuff. We started, so our problem with truth became, as long as it results in good, in moral good, then it's okay to exaggerate. And this is something I don't like in American culture.
The Finns don't do this.
No, not at all. It's offensive. Actually, Germans don't do it either.
Yeah, I was on a Finnair flight recently from Tallinn, from Helsinki to Tallinn. Mm-hmm. We're delayed half an hour. And the pilot gets on the loudspeaker and he says, sorry, we can't take off. The wing is broken.
Yes, you'd never hear that from an American pilot.
And I didn't, to be honest, I didn't want to hear. I'm sure they can fix it. I'm sure they can fix the wing, but I don't want to know about it.
Well, so cultures express their truth. Now, the problem is the more homogeneous a culture, the easier it is. The more diverse a culture, the harder it is.
So why that bears elaboration. And I know what you mean by that, but if you can explain why that is. Why does homogeneity versus heterogeneity?
Because as competition goes up, the value of lying goes up. As competition goes down, the value of truth goes up. Because it's not. These aren't complicated things. You get a bunch of Germanic people together who've been, even any in-group tends to be fairly truth-oriented, right?
Yeah, of course.
Right, and so the problem you have is the pressure from out-groups. So, it's really easy to be all high and mighty and talk about truth when you're in Britain, you're on a freaking island somewhere. It's a lot harder to be Russia, where you're surrounded by, we've been conducting genetic pacification in the West for a long time. I bring this up, and I just love these statistics. We've been killing, 0.5% to 1% of people for over 1,000 years. And China's been doing the same thing. And
But when you say killing, you mean execution, hanging.
Executing criminals. Whereas China, they've been doing it the same thing, except they do it in really big numbers with enthusiasm. The problem for Russia is their own pacification. They're fine. It's actually a pretty hostile climate. Their problem is they're surrounded by people who haven't conducted their whole southern borders by people who not only don't practice genetic pacification, they do the opposite. They weaponize reproduction. So from a Russian's perspective, they have a different view of the world. I love, one of the things I hear of them is we're just little Russia.
There's nothing little about it. Yeah.
Well, no, from their standpoint, we're just little Russia, and it's all you people out there causing us problems. Well, we're wrong. Democracy was wrong. Russians are right. Democracy is a terrible thing. This idea of an aristocracy of everybody, it's been a tragedy for the West. Has capitalism been good? Absolutely. That's why everybody, Western and not, has adopted it. But a consumer, because it benefits consumers. It creates a voluntary organization of production in which everybody has an incentive to use what local information available and their local resources available, whatever it is they know, to produce. Well, it turns out that that's about the best way you can give people. But democracy is a terrible idea.
Can you make that sell?
Well, I can make it sell as long as you say, well, democracy is really good as long as it's 2 million to 5 million people. It works great.
Yeah, it works fine. The smaller countries of the world.
This is why the places like Estonia to me are heaven. People, this is why Sweden has gone suicidal because they're delusional about it. This is why Denmark is Denmark. Why the Nordic countries are there, because they're freaking small. This is why Sweden is Switzerland is the perfect society, right? They've got all these little cantons, and everything's democratic within them, and so it's a very participatory product. You're never alienated.
Armed to the teeth as well, which is extremely important.
Well, they're also armed, and they're also all participating in militia, so they all feel ownership of the society. There's no them. This is the problem you get. If there's a them, us is always easy. It's the thems. And so you get rid of having common interests means there's no them. The more diversity of interests you have, the more them there are. Now, the problem we get with different cultures and races is that we have different distributions of talents and different reproductive strategies. And so some of us are more competitive than the others, mostly because some of us have gotten rid of our lower classes more effectively than others. This is what I usually say. The difference between the races is just who's killed off more of the problem people. So this
that bears just a little bit more. You take the higher classes or the upper class, the controlling classes from just about any culture in the world.
Doesn't matter.
And you'll find almost identical statistics: IQ, talent, achievement.
This is why the upper financial class around the world, they can all go to the mountains in Switzerland once a year.
Yeah, the Doha class is quite multicultural, isn't it?
Yeah, because they're all the same. Yep. This is why I favor aristocracy. I'm always pushing aristocracy over democracy. Is that paternalism, treating your culture as your family, treating your extended tribe as your family, turns out to be really good. It's one of the things that made us terribly successful. The reason you build a large centralized state, whether it be China, who succeeded at first, or France, who you did it under Napoleon, or now Europe's trying to do it, and you're just trying to turn into America. Meanwhile, the rest of us are trying to turn America into old Europe, is because the value of scale is war. That's it. That's the only value of scale. That's why we do it. That's why Napoleon did it. He combined total war with financialization, and he was able to do it. The Brits responded. So we get the Rothschilds from. Make sense?
Yep. Well, the value of scale of war. Sorry, the value of scale as war obviously makes sense. But the value of scale, isn't there also an economic argument in favor of?
Well,
no, there's not.
There's not
when
really.
When it comes to scalability, you don't want. Economics is not.
Density helps. Density reduces transaction
density,
costs.
of course.
Scale helps you with trade policy, all right, and it helps a little bit with rural areas because then now they can participate in infrastructure they couldn't otherwise afford. That's different from saying I need to impose my social policy in the city on the social policy on the rural area, which is what causes all the friction. Is that the original meaning of liberty was I can keep my local laws, right?
I thought a free man was, and a free man was
Free and
someone,
liberty are two different terms.
of course they are. Yep.
And so, liberty meant I want to have my liberty. We want to retain our local laws and customs. Well, I mean, if central governments manage financial transactions and commercial disputes, and they let local groups maintain their customs, then we wouldn't have these problems. But the minute you tell, this is something, I disagree with this homogenization. I mean, if you go to, I'm not going to pick on Africans because I don't have really anything against them. But, if you take any group that's less pacified, and you put it with a group that's more pacified, you're going to have conflict. And so if you put two groups together, one that is at less advantaged and one's more, they're going to enforce signals more and they're going to compete. If you put them under democracy, they're going to compete for privilege via the state to give them competitive advantage over it. When we gave women the franchise, they competed with men for property rights. Women have voted to restore communalism, even though the development of property is what has allowed us to build civilization. So we're just like justificationary verbal machines that run around trying to negotiate with each other on behalf of our genes, but that's all that's going on. So there's nothing complex about this. The real problem is, how do we make it so people with different groups can cooperate rather than oppress each other?
Which is a waste of our time, is it not? I mean, this conflict, this manufactured conflict.
It's all crap.
Yeah.
So democracy in my world, it just created an opportunity to destroy the family and destroy Western civilization. Whereas if we had preserved, in other words, democracy in the sense that there's just majority rule, if instead we'd extended the Anglo model, which is that there's a House of Lords, a House of the middle class, which they call commons, and a House of the Proletarian, or what used to be the church, and those groups traded, made contracts instead of law, which would be legally binding, right? They made legal contracts with one another, and they couldn't break the common law. Then everything they did would be, I think we could have classes cooperate. But the minute you make heterogeneous polities, you do multiculturalism, that can't work now, because now you have competitors, not cooperators. So that's the point I wanted to make there was that this division of labor across the civilizations isn't a problem for Russia and Germany and the Anglosphere and the Americosphere. And I want to separate us out because we're a little crazier than the Brits are. And that's the reason it's a problem is because we can't conduct trades, just like it's a problem. Democracy is a problem because the classes can't conduct trades because of majority rule. And these things come from our Enlightenment fallacy that whatever we need to do as this group needs to be universal instead of creating a market, not a market for goods and services alone, but a market for the production of commons. So to some degree, if you got us together and we could only conduct moral exchanges of commons, we'd actually could hold each other to it, the civilizations would be really good. But what's preventing the unification of the circumpolar people? It's Russia. It's the only society that doesn't tell the truth yet. They're the only white people who haven't learned how to get out of the past. And so what's preventing them from doing that, honestly, is American idealism, utopianism, which we get in from every end of the spectrum. We get neoconservatives trying to make new Rome. We get libertarians trying to say that totally free and open markets. We have progressives that are trying to increase the size of the state and diversity. We have Americans destroying the world. Not only their world, but using their military and commercial might to damage the rest of the world. Where the Russians are right. They're like, these guys down here, they're in this part of the world, they need authority. Don't interfere with it. They'll just kill each other.
And that may be contentious, but having some experience, authority is something that's necessary to the culture. I don't know if you know Sean Gabb or not, but an English writer, and also libertarian or Austrian. I'm not sure exactly how it identified, but he states, he's making an argument in a speech I heard 6-7 months ago, or maybe longer. Let cultures define their own structures and their own hierarchies and their own political organizations. This idea that the Russian needs to live under the American democratically elected republic is a bit silly. The Russian will often choose authoritarianism, or behaves better is perhaps a better way to say it.
Well, I mean, there's two different things. There's production of commons, which we call government, which I would agree with. In other words, the production of commons should be suitable to the population. Yeah. Rule is universal, either law, rule of law, okay. Right? Yep. So I separate rule from governance. And so, if we can cooperate as long as we have rule, which is we all can have a jury across each other and say, we're in our common interest, and I'm sorry, but this is just true and this is false. We can have contracts for exchange if we have uniform rule. But government should be government, which is the production of local commons to suit the needs of the local population, is just regionalism. Right? You need regional production of commons.
Yep, exactly right. And Benjamin Constant uses that.
Yes, I didn't know that until you told me about it.
No, it's an excellent, I think Ralph Raico wrote the introduction. I've got it around here somewhere. But it's brilliant. And so I often remind Estonians or Russians, Moscow found it very easy to rule several thousand kilometers, yes. Or 6, 7, all the way to Vladivostok, yep. But could not rule over Tallinn, could not rule over yes. Estonia. And once they learned that, they practice the age-old solution, which is replace the population, the local population, with people who will support and who will vote. So culture is far more formidable as a barrier.
Yeah, and we want it to be. Again, I'd love it if Russia patrolled the seas instead of us.
I'm sorry?
I'd love it if Russia patrolled the seas in front of us. They don't have any of this political nonsense. Stuff's either right or wrong. You're a problem, they'll sink you. I'd rather have the Russians patrol the seas. I'd rather have bankruptcies conducted by American courts.
Yeah, they have no problem shooting down Somali pirates, for example.
No, right? Because they're wrong. There's no...
Just shoot and ask questions later.
Well, they're sensible, Americans are utopian. They're wrong. The utopian vision of man is the aristocracy of everybody, and it's wrong. It failed. It's not idealist. It's empirically wrong, and it's logically wrong. That's it. We failed. Our program has failed. So what do we do? Well, I want to make it so that we can unite us all, so there's not this competition before. And that means we need to get Russian pragmatism and Russian and German pragmatism in the West. We need to get American capital risk in the East, and we need to get rule of law everywhere. And that's it. And so I don't like this, that Russia is telling its people that we're hostile to them. We're not.
This is the propaganda.
This is the propaganda. I mean, Americans have more common with Russians than Europeans.
Oh, I make that argument all the time.
It's all, we have more common with Russians than Europeans.
So much more. We're both frontiers people. We're both.
And we joke about this, but Russian men are men, and most of us Americans think European men are pussies, right? I mean, it's just.
Speak for yourself, but yeah.
You do. No, you can lie on camera. So that's what I wanted to wrap up with, is that, we start out with this very interesting question of, this moral right and wrong. But the problem is actually quite if we disassemble it into just preconceptions of Enlightenment preconceptions and group evolutionary strategies, you realize that this is a solvable problem.
And I find the pipeline the Baltic pipeline, Russia direct to Germany, I think it's excellent.
Well, it's only excellent if we can get past this problem. If Russians are thinking about, I want to restore the empire because I feel downtrodden and betrayed, and they're not wrong to feel that in some extent, but I mean, again, it's American utopianism that's driving this belief that Russia is just going to slowly transform and become, Eastern version of Germany, anyway, this is a fixable problem. I just want to solve it. We're running out of time, which is why I'm cutting out. Anyway, so have you had fun with this?
I have, yeah. Something's bothered me though during this interview.
What's bothering you?
Are you wearing makeup?
Yeah, I'm wearing makeup.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I thought I could tell that.
Well, I left a little lipstick on your neck. All right, I want to thank everybody for your patience. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to contact Don or I, please do. This is a production of the Propertarian Institute. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Very, very good.